remember 1928 because my dad got his first car, and that was a Model T Ford. And we kids would sit in there, and he'd have to get out and crank the car to make it go. And in 1930, about 3 months before he got killed, he bought his second car, which was a Model A. And that was also a crank, but it was a little bit more modern than the Model T. I remember much about the late 20s, but in the 30s, I remember, first off, my father got killed on July 18, 1930. He was a fireman. He fell off a roof, high floors, and of course it killed him. And in 1932, we elected the best president we ever had in the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and everybody loved him because they were so poor, people didn't even have food on their table, and when he got in, he did everything he could so that the poor people at least could have something to eat. And in 1933, Chicago had a Chicago World's Fair, and we had Sally Rand, who used to do it was all feathers, and she never had any clothes on. She'd have a big feather in the back and a big feather in the front, and she would do her dance. And she was really well famous in that.
Do you remember anything of the 20s?
Well, very little. There was some tough years there. I mean, lots of snow. Mostly traveling was by horse. Team horses at that time yet. I mean, cars and tractors were just starting.
Okay.
Started school at Loveland Corners out there. I had neighbors took turns hooking up a cutter and bring us to school one day, and the next day would be my dad's turn. It was back in the old days, I guess. Went through the 30s there. Yeah. Depression, hot weather. Some of the heat records that we're trying to break today came from in the 30s, 34, 35. But they were tough years, but I guess we all made it.
Stay here.
Anything else happen in the 30s when you came?
Well, yeah, the first thing I really remember is going to the World's Fair. And I don't remember what year. It was either 1933 or 34. And I remember Royal Coaster Wagons had a statue of a kid in a coaster wagon with one leg in the coaster wagon and the other one like he was pushing it. And then they had, at that time it was Sinclair, they had dinosaurs, the models of dinosaurs, and that I remember. And I remember going on the one ride, I don't remember what it was called, but you went up a tower and then you slid down a tube and you came out on a pad at the bottom. I remember that. Too much else I don't remember too much about, but that I do remember. In the 30s you didn't have money for much of anything, so whatever money you could make, I remember, I forget how old I was, I delivered circulars for a local, like, small department store. Got 25 cents for the whole batch of circulars we had to deliver. So that's basically the most I remember then, is about, well, the Hitler on the radio. I know this friend of mine, his father, thought Hitler was wonderful, and he used to listen to the radio and hear his speeches.
Why did he think he was wonderful?
I don't know. He thought he was a nice guy, and I didn't think so. I remember that.
I guess the world made that judgment too.
Yeah.
For the 40s, what do you remember was going on in your family in the 40s?
Well, let's see. I remember when the war started and Germany invaded Poland.
That would have been the end of the 30s, okay.
That was 39, and then when England got it into the war in 39, and then when France fell in May of, was it May? Yeah, I think it was May of 1940. And that, I remember the newsreel with the showed the Germans marching into Paris, and showed this one Frenchman standing there crying. That was, yeah, that was in 1940. And then you hear about, at 11 years old, I wasn't paying that much attention to everything that was going on. But I remember all the battles when the English and the French were fighting Germans. And then I remember in towards the end of 40, I forget what it was. No, not everything you can remember, but I remember when, basically, what I really remember was from 41, the end of 41, because that's when, I remember I went to the show at the Oak Theater on Western and Armitage, and that's no longer there now, I understand. I went into the show, and I come home, and everybody's saying, geez, that's terrible. I said, what? And they said that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. And then I remember Uncle Roy went in February. He joined the Army, him and his friend Jack Van Camp. And then they went down, they first went to Camp Grant, which was in western Illinois. And then he went from there down to Florida for his training. And then he took some training up near Massachusetts. And then I remember him coming home on leave, and then he went back in, and then he got shipped overseas, and that was in 42 when he didn't get into the invasion of North Africa. He got there after it ended towards the end of 42 or early 43, and then he stayed there till they were training. His division didn't get into Sicily. They were still training in North Africa. And then they got in the invasion in Italy, at Salerno, which is south of Naples. And then I remember he got wounded, about 3 weeks after they landed. Him and an officer he was in a machine gun crew, and him and his officer were spotting from a farmhouse for the machine guns, and the Germans figured it was being used for spotting, so they opened fire on it, and the officer got pretty badly wounded. He lost an arm, I guess, and an eye, and Uncle Roy only got hit with shrapnel, but he got right in the forehead. He got hit with the shrapnel. And he stayed over there for all of 43 and the early part of 44. And then he had got on a boat to come, and the boat never got out of the harbor of Naples. It hit a mine, and so they had to get off that boat, and then he finally came home. He said it took him 2 weeks to cross the Atlantic because they kept zigzagging across the Atlantic. And then he came home, and he came home on leave. And time he came home in 44, I was working for Pepsi-Cola.
Yes, that happened to you in the 40s.
Oh, in the 40s? Well, when the war ended in Germany, I remember I went downtown, and there was a madhouse. There was crazy people down there. And that was pretty exciting. And then when I was in school, and I remember when in 44, when the invasion was, I was in what was it? Machine drawing in high school, and the teacher, they put on the loudspeakers about the landing in Normandy. And that's all we did. We sat there and listened to it. We didn't do any more work. And then 46, I started.
So you alluded to a lot of what was going on in the world in the 40s. Is there anything else you want to say about what was going on in the world that you haven't already said?
Oh, I remember all the bond drives when when City of Chicago, they had a cruiser that was sunk, and it was this cruiser Chicago, and they had to raise, I forget how many millions, they wanted to pay for a new one.
When World War II broke out, in December 7, 1941, Japan attacked at Pearl Harbor. And next day, President Roosevelt declared war. He asked Congress, give him the power to declare war on Japan. And then he declared on Japan, then in Germany. That's when we entered December 8. Japan, we declared war on Japan, and December 8, the same time we declared war against Germany. And that was 1941. That's when everybody wanted to get into war, even I'm included. Even I was married with 3 kids.
And what did you do?
Well, I was talked out by my brother Stanley, he was the oldest, and then my brother Ed, he's younger than me. Then my half-brother Steve, he was in the Air Force as sergeant. And he says, you're nuts to get in the Army. There's 3 of us, and you got 3 kids. Where is your brains? And he told me, stay out of it. 3 is enough. And I stayed. And next thing I know, I was called in front of the board. And before they had you, what you call draft board, and they asked me what my intention to do, get in the Army or stay. And I told them I'm staying because I got 3 brothers, and I told them who they were, and they looked at me and said, that's right, they had all the records down. They knew when you're lying or not. And they said, well, we want you to get, what are you doing now? I work for Flashing Neon. And they told me, you cannot work for a non-productive, you gotta get in defense plant. He says, there's 2 plants you can go to. He says, the first one, he says, Buick was making airplane motors. And that was I can't think, it was out in the country. No, we had no car, only my friend, he always had old jalopies. And the newest one was Bendix, that was on Chicago Avenue in Sacramento. They were making carburetors. So I choose, instead of going out in the country with an old car, we better off to ride a streetcar, and it's 7 cents. So we went and got a job in the defense plant, Bendix Aviation, making carburetors for the airplanes. And at the same time, my wife got a job there before I did. She got in called, and she went to school in Lane Tech to study to be inspector. She went to 6 weeks training school in Lane Tech High School, and they taught her how to read gauges of all kinds and gauge the carburetors. So she got hired 3 months before I did. She worked 3 months, and then I joined her. They put me in the airbox and being the maintenance man of the airbox where they test carburetors. But the money, you could work all the hours you wanted to make money, and money was to be had. They were paying good. I got $1.25 an hour, and that was good money. I can't complain. Only they told us this was a war plant, and as soon as the war is over, he says, you're out of a job. So that was it. We got laid off in May of 1945 because they made that. When did they made that invasion? In June or May?